The facts, dates, and events presented in this video are from the members' best recollection and may not be fully accurate. This video is intended for entertainment purposes only. Always consult with your local union about your rights and duties at your workplace. The opinions shared on this video are our own and do not necessarily represent my employer's positions, strategies, or opinions. All views shared are protected under the National Labor Relations Act.
Hey, brothers and sisters, welcome to the next episode of the Biweekly Grievance. I'm your host, Dan Arlen. Today, I want to focus on the upcoming contract and the importance of getting public support for our issues, as is important to all contract negotiations, especially ones that could possibly lead to a strike, which is where I think we're headed on this one. I've invited two guests on. They are not union members. They are not 100% fans of unions, or at least not to the level where I completely stand behind unions. One of them is a friend of mine, Larry. We have lifelong history together. Our families grew up in the same town together. We had a lot of interaction as kids. I've known him for over 40 years. But up until I reached out to him about this, I haven't seen or spoken to Larry in over 30 years. Also, we have Josh. I graduated high school with Josh, and we're coming up on our 30th anniversary next year in 2024. And I haven't seen him since high school. So these are not people that I see on a daily basis or have had much knowledge, other than some interaction through Facebook where I've learned that they weren't 100% fans of unions. So I think that makes for a good conversation. So first, Larry, if you could just give us a little bio of yourself, I would appreciate that.
All right. Well, thanks for having me on the show. I'm Larry Petrovich. I'm 46. Like Danny said, we grew up together. I joined the Navy, served 20 years, and now I'm a retired disabled vet. My view to the whole union is I've worked with some folks within the military that were unionized. I'm kind of a middle guy. I think there needs to be a little more leverage given and a little more take from both sides. So I can understand some views from each. And of course, that's where my opinions lie. And we'll probably get into that further in the show.
Perfect. I appreciate that. And thank you for your career in the service. That's always honorable. And second, Josh, if you could just give a little bio of yourself, and if you want to get into the incident that we spoke of, that I think is good to just give some perspective on your view of unions. Go ahead.
Sure. So, Dan, thanks for having me. My name is Josh Bassett, retired from the Coast Guard after 20 years. So I had an incident when I was a junior enlisted member. I had a little run-in with a union member. He threatened to crack my head open with a 2x4, actually. Reported that up through my command. He hid behind the union. The union protected him, and actually nothing happened prior
and
to that.
And of your own wording, you would say that you have a bias against unions because of your experience.
Yeah, absolutely. They protected this guy, and I wasn't fully satisfied with anything that happened there. So yeah, I created a bias at that point towards unions for protecting this guy.
As everybody knows, July 31st of this year, the contract expires between UPS and the Teamsters, and roughly 350,000 employees will be on strike as of August 1st if we do not have a tentative agreement with the company. What I would like is to have a discussion about the things that we're asking for, and to get some outside perspective on whether, as non-union people with slightly biases against unions, if you think the union is asking for legitimate stuff, and something that you think the public would get behind. So with that, one of the biggest issues is our part-timers work grueling hours, third shift mostly. They load the trucks. The buildings have no air conditioning. They're sweat boxes. Even in the north, on a humid day, overnight, those buildings are like ovens. And they make near minimum wage. Now, based upon history, if you take their pay raise or their pay rate back in the 80s, and you keep up with inflation, they should be making over $25 an hour. and they are kissing minimum wage. We are asking the company to bring these people up to roughly around that $25 an hour mark for the work that they do. These members have seen, where UPS has struggled getting people to work on the streets. They have done what they call a market rate adjustment and hired people at a higher pay rate than our own employees were making because they couldn't get people to do the job. How do you feel about, contract raises and asking a company to jump people's pay raises like $8 at a shot? Larry, if you want to go first.
Yeah, so my take on that is, before we talked about record highs with money coming in. And I'll agree that over the last 2 years, these guys have had, speaking of UPS, the 11 and $12 billion actual net gross, right? But prior to that was like one and then went under that. So when I look at things like this, I think it's fair to ask for a raise. Do I think $8 an hour at a pop? I don't know. You have to look at financials. Obviously, UPS has 500 plus thousand workers, right? I don't know how many of those are part-timers, but $8 a pop when you go across the board, that's a lot of money. And so are you asking for it to be incremental? Are you asking for it all to be now? And also, can there be a meet in the middle where it's by area? So kind of like how different people in the military housing gets. It's a cost of living type adjustment for their housing. So is it fair to give somebody that lives in, I know for lack of a place, South Georgia, where the economy isn't as booming as, say, North Georgia, Atlanta, because it's not the same cost of living. So can you do it based off that rather than a flat rate? Kind of meet somewhere in the middle and understand their finances and what that number looks like.
Okay. Now, Josh, you have an opinion on that?
I think that, like Larry said, you got to look at the area you're living in. I live in Key West, so it's expensive to live here. Equitable adjustments can be made, varying on contracts and such. I mean, I also am a core for government contracts right now. So you have to look at, where you're at and the cost of living and how much it's going up in that area.
Mm-hmm. Now, the union's perspective on this is, one, while most people were ordered to stay home and a lot of companies folded because they just didn't have the business during the pandemic, obviously buying things shifted to completely online for a period of time to where UPS, let's put it this way, in my first 15, 17 years at the company, we were lucky if we saw one or two new drivers in our building a year. It was just, you just didn't see a lot of turnover. And just in the last few years since this started, I couldn't even tell you half the people in my building anymore. We've nearly doubled in size. And, even when people went back to work, they didn't shift back to going back to stores. So a lot of brick and mortar stores are suffering right now because everyone's so comfortable with ordering everything online that not only has UPS's income gone up 250% over these last few years, but they are projected to keep going up. Like the boom isn't going to end for UPS because of the shift in mentality of people ordering stuff. This company, obviously they're a business. They're going to try to look to pay as little as they can, and they're going to negotiate with the union. But the fact is that these part-timers haven't got a significant raise in probably 20 years, to the point where they were making equitable amount of money back in the 80s. And with inflation going up and pay raises not really being there for them, they're now kissing minimum wage, which is not a livable wage, as most people can understand. The fact that they made $100 billion during the pandemic and have set record after record profit, the fact that they're fighting that is, to me, absurd.
Now, if I may, with that,
Mhm.
this is where I get my my chafing from folks. So yes, they made, like, a company makes gross numbers. So we're talking, when you say that, you're in my opinion, it's kind of misleading folks, because they don't have 100 million profit, right? Because your guys' salaries come out of it. That's in the billions. Gas and other stuff, supplies, billions. So you're removing that. So you bring it down to, yes, the last 2 years have been astounding at 11 and 12 billion net. But in their perspective, before the pandemic, it was 1 billion, right? So let's say that we get these guys that jump on board with something. What happens if we all do go back to that brick and mortar buying and it's not as much? Projections are just that, they're projections, right? So we can say, yes, we think this is going to happen, but these guys have to look at their long term, right? I'm not saying these guys don't need pay raises. Pay raises are necessary. But does it need to be that much right away? Without,
well, I mean, obviously that would be negotiated. I mean, and obviously there would be a considerable pay bump the day the contract is signed. I mean, there's so far, minimum wage is not acceptable in this society, especially with everything costing so much with inflation. But yes, that to get to them up to the $25 an hour mark would be stretched out over a 5-year period. It wouldn't all be at once. Maybe half of that up front and, $1 an hour every contract year or something like that. I'm not in the room, so I can't really tell you exactly what's being talked about, but that would be a possibility. Go ahead, Josh.
If I may, are we talking part-time employees here?
We are, but let me give you two other interesting pieces of fact that may help you guys. Believe it or not, in all of the United States, in every UPS facility, that when people load trucks, other than 2 buildings, every building in the United States loads the trucks by part-timers, which means they load, say, roughly 3 trucks a night in a 4-hour period, versus in Massachusetts, we have the only 2 full-time preloads in all of the United States. One of them is in Springfield, where I work, and one of them, I believe, is in Watertown. I'm not exactly 100% positive on that. I should get that. But anyways, there's 2 total, and they're both in Mass. Now, doing exactly the same job, except one's part-time, one's full-time. One loads 3 trucks a night, one loads 6 trucks a night because they're working twice as many hours. Okay. The full-time preloads, the 2 of them, make $40 an hour loading trucks. The rest of the people that load on a part-time basis, which I understand most part-time jobs don't pay as well as full-time jobs. But that being said, having part-timers doing the same exact job, making barely minimum wage, somewhere around $16, $17 an hour, and for doing the same exact job full-time, people are making $40+ an hour. Does that make sense?
yes. But again, you're talking Massachusetts, and you and I both grew up there, and we know, again, as Josh was talking about cost of living. Again, I like numbers, and $16, $17 an hour, by the way, is almost double the minimum wage. Not kissing it, right? However, can you bump them up to, say, 20? Give them a $4?
Yeah, but you got to remember that most states are going up to $15 an hour with minimum wage. I mean, that's almost standard across the country. So when I say kissing minimum wage, I'm talking about the government says that $15 an hour is the minimum for sustaining a livable wage. So maybe not every state's there yet, but they're all heading to $15 an hour.
Okay, so how many part-time employees does UPS utilize, right?
Well, we have roughly 350,000 employees, and I will tell you that more than 60% of our workforce is part-time. So yes, it's considerable. But here's another, you like numbers, here's another number. And when I put out the video, I'm going to have these slides on the screen. UPS per employee, part-time, full-time, every employee per employee makes over $24,000 in sheer profit. That means subtracting cost, subtracting wages, everything. They make more than $24,000 off of each and every employee that works for UPS, versus our closest competitor, FedEx, make somewhere down near the $14,000 mark per employee. So they're making an extra $10,000 per employee. And, we're the ones that made this company thrive during the pandemic. We're the ones that, they called us heroes pandemic heroes during the, when everyone was at home, and we were the connection between retailers and people at home. But now they're looking for concessions and are fighting pay raises.
What concessions though? What is their return to that? Like you want a bump. What is their response to that?
The company's term that they have demanded is a cost neutral contract. So they literally, after receiving record profits over the last few years, billions in record profits, 250% higher profits than they've ever made. And they are looking for, if they give us something that costs the company $5 million, hence pay raises, they want $5 million in concessions. So in the end, that this new contract costs them nothing more. Thoughts?
I would definitely have to look up well, I guess I'd have to understand what the cost neutral contract actually entails.
Well, that's exactly, I mean, it can mean anything that the union and the company, the union and the company, it really can be anything that they want it to be, right? But basically the definition of a cost neutral contract, for example, we wanted to expand our holidays, right? We get X amount of holidays per year. And, we're looking to add Martin Luther King as a paid holiday, not necessarily off. It just means that instead of, like, for example, Veterans Day, that's a paid holiday for us. We work it, but we get 8 hours holiday pay on top of time and a half for the entire day that we worked. Okay. And that varies in supplements. So that's not standard across the whole country. That's in particular to our area. That's what we get. And there are variances on that. So to get into particulars of the entire country, it's more, we're going to have to just kind of float with the idea that it's going to be different in every local, but just for conversation purposes, that's where we're at. So we wanted to add Martin Luther King and Juneteenth as paid holidays. So in order for the company to agree to give us those holidays, they want us to give them back two of the holidays we already have. Right. So that would be an example of a cost neutral contract. Anything they give us, they want something in return. So in the end, this contract costs them no more than the other contract. And what's funny is the union calls it sweat equity, right? The fact that they have forced our members, and I don't mean voluntarily, they have threatened our members. Our contract calls for 5 consecutive work days with 2 consecutive work days off. And when the pandemic started and there was a mad rush to ship everything because everybody was stuck at home, they started forcing our members to work 6 days a week, coming in on their days off on Saturday. And when it started, there was no rebellion from the employees. We understood it. We were the lifeline to people stuck at home, and we were willing to put in the effort. And not to mention the fact we were happy to be still working and being paid very well with the overtime, working 6 days a week. But the company has now used that as a tool. And here we are 3+ years into a pandemic, or now I guess it's officially over, but 3 years into it. And they're still forcing our guys to work 6 days a week and threatening them if they don't come in on their days off. So they have made all this extra money off of us. And yes, we've made our fair share, but they still have been one of the most profitable companies in the United States during the pandemic period, and projected only to get more, which I understand, Larry, their projections are projections, but, these aren't, Joe Blow just picking a thing. They actually know what they're talking about and have calculations. Even companies project their own stuff. So it's not like it's a nothing tool. But
I guess
what do you think about that?
If I may say, and then Josh, I hope I don't keep talking on you. You're talking to 2 retired military guys here. I went on deployments where guys worked 84 hours a week because they had 12-hour shifts during the day and had additional stuff to go. Um, so, and we got paid what we got paid. You guys, obviously, from what you're saying, you guys get paid really well. I will never ask anyone their salary, but I would like a general ballpark on an average. What do these drivers that make like 6 days a week work? What are they making?
Well,
Because
first of all, you got to remember it's forced overtime. It's not volunteered forced or volunteer. So with the forced overtime, which is another part of the contract, we're trying to eliminate their ability to force people to work 6 days a week. You know, it's different during Christmas when there's anticipated bump and thing. We understand that. We all signed up for that job. But to make people work 6 days a week, I mean, UPS would like to think they're of themselves as a branch of the military, but let's face it, we're not. Okay, we're not defending people's rights and our country. We're talking about a job. Okay, and we have people who it's costing them their marriages because they're only home 1 day a week and they're home on Sundays. So, like, what can they do to help their spouses? Can they go pay bills? Can they run errands? Can they go to the bank? I mean, there's a lot of things that you can't do on Sundays that you can do the rest of the week. So it's an incredible burden on those families. And not to mention the fact that, like, in my particular case, I'm divorced. I only get my son on the weekends, right? I mean, I come home from UPS sometimes 7, 8, 9 o'clock at night. He's already getting ready for bed for school. So, like, I don't get him during the week. And if I'm being forced to work 6 days a week and I only get my son 1 day a week, how fair is that to him, right? So, again, I respect the military. I'm former Air Force. I did not do a career. I did one tour, but we're not defending a country here. It's a job, right? And none of us, there are no lazy people at UPS. Trust me, the lazy ones don't make it. They end up quitting or not making it because it's a brutal job. So nobody's complaining about the work. But when a contract says 5 days a week with 2 consecutive days off, and for 3 years they've gotten away with forcing people to work 6 days a week, yes, we make a great salary. Most UPS drivers, not part-timers, okay, so 2 different things. The drivers, a lot of them are making over 100,000 a year. Easy. But how much of that is forced overtime? And you can have all the money in the world, but what does that do to your family and your kids?
Well, one thing, Dan, so, and I don't mean, like I said before, I'm not going to disparage anybody from the choice they make or, being a part of the union. But, you said during the pandemic, the workers were happy to take in the overtime and, go to work for UPS and, do their job and fly the colors, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And now it's forced overtime and, that precedence has been set. So the companies, really taking advantage of that.
It's been forced overtime the entire time, though. Okay, this wasn't a voluntary thing. What I was getting at was the fact that when it first started, we all understood. Okay, we were all understood that people were stuck at home, and we were their lifeline, getting dog food, non-perishables, diapers, medicines. We understood that we were that lifeline, and trust me, there wasn't a single employee that cared about putting in the effort to try to help America through what we were going through at the time. Okay, but it's also the company's obligation to adjust for that at some point, right? If we're so busy that you need extra people, then you need to hire people, right? But instead, because here's another interesting fact, okay? On top of my hourly wage, they pay the union X amount of dollars for every hour I work for the first 40 hours to pay for my health and welfare benefits. Okay, that's part of the contract.
Right.
When they put us on overtime, yes, the individual employee is making more money, but it's actually cheaper for the company because they're not paying health and welfare on overtime. Right. So their costs go down when we start making more money in overtime. I'm getting a puzzled look from Larry. Does that not make sense to you?
No, it absolutely does. But
okay,
so I guess here's where again, numbers. You're playing a number game with everybody because I guess here's the thing. I do think they make a lot of money. I do think there needs to be more workers, not as much overtime. But when you start saying things like that, that's not it's not entirely a not a. I don't want to call it not truth, but it's not. You guys still have health coverage though because you're overtime. Yes, these
No,
guys are
I'm
like
just
paying so much
pointing
to
out the fact that once they pay the 8 hours of health and welfare benefits, their costs go down. So my point is that they're abusing because it's cheaper for them, right? There's no consideration for the employee that for the last 3 years, they have been forced to work 6 days a week. And yes, no one's arguing that we don't get paid well, but we all deserve to have a home life as well. You can make all the money you want in the world. And if your home life, if you're getting divorced because your wife's basically a single parent, or your kids are suffering because they don't get the time with their parent that works for UPS, that's an issue, right? It causes stress. It causes depression. It causes divorce. I mean, we're talking about a quality of life. I mean, it's one thing when the pandemic started, there was a necessity. But at some point, the company is required to adjust for that, right? Why? Just because it's cheaper labor in overtime doesn't mean they have the right to abuse it forever, right? Especially when it's in violation of the contract. Remember, I told you that our contract calls for a 5 consecutive workday with 2 consecutive days off. And there's a majority of people at UPS that haven't had a 2-day off cycle in 3 years, right? They're taking advantage of the situation. And again, it's not about laziness. It's not about us trying to get out of work or, unions trying to take advantage of the situation. This is a matter of life quality for the very employees that made this company all those profits and have made this company so successful. And it is a joint venture. I'm not bashing UPS completely here. I mean, anybody that can work somebody for less money, they're going to do it because that's the nature of the business. But this is a matter of violation of language in our contract as well as abusing something that's been happening. I mean, nobody predicted the pandemic, and there wasn't a single member that said, screw people. I'm working. I don't care. I don't want the overtime. You didn't hear that. You heard after a year and people were starting to go back to work, but people are creatures of habit. We all know that. And the general public, although there's going to be times where, the shipping boom might go down, I'm telling you, it's not. The average person doesn't even go to their grocery store anymore. They get their groceries delivered, right? Why? Because it was a thing, right? So now it's easy. Why would you spend an hour in a grocery store when you can just order it and sit at home and all of a sudden it's there, right? You get more hours in your day that way. So, and even brick and mortar stores, they're seeing the painting on the wall. Look at a lot of these malls, like the Holyoke Mall, right? They're turning it into an entertainment complex because there's not enough stores, right? You have trampoline parks, you have movie theaters, you have all these things moving into them because nobody goes to stores anymore, and then you also add in the fear. Some people fear going to the shopping malls because of all the shootings in this country. So I would argue that the sustainability of packages being delivered are going to keep going for a long time, if not forever, because it's just human nature. Once people get in a cycle, they stay there, right? And something else is going to have to come along before that cycle changes. And whereas our contracts are only for 5 years, we're talking about what's going to happen over the next 5 years. I don't think anybody would predict that packages are going to be less over the next 5 years. They're going to stay the same or get more.
Well, I agree. Given where I live, shipping is huge.
So another thing that, you guys should be aware of is the fact that, our contract, as I've stated, says 5 consecutive days with 2 consecutive days off. There is a loophole in there, and there is language that when there's a need that they can force us to work 6 days a week. But the intent of that rule was the fact that around Christmas, we all know that we get swamped with packages and Christmas presents. So it was meant for like short term, for like peak or holiday weekends like Mother's Day, where pajamagrams and flowers and teddy bears and all that stuff gets sent, and it's a massive flood for that weekend. They can force people in to cover that volume. But they're abusing that because first it was the pandemic. Oh, it's a pandemic, and they forced us to do it. Well, we've now returned to more of a normal lifestyle, and I think the actual term pandemic is over, and they're still forcing because they're claiming a need. But they're doing very little to fill that void with extra employees. And they, on top of that, because it benefits them, they keep claiming a need, and it needs to come to an end because it's affecting people's lives. Another issue, I don't know if you have caught any of the stories, there's three famous ones, I should say famous, tragic stories that have hit the national media that you may or may not be aware of. One of them is in California, a young man by the name of Chavez died in the back of his UPS truck the day after his 24th birthday of hypothermia, because his truck, and I don't know what the exact temperature is, but I have several pictures from different UPSers, especially in the southern states where it's mostly more hot than in the north. Temperatures in the back of those trucks reaching 158 degrees. So, if somebody is exposed to that for a period of time, like sorting for packages and looking for something, and you're back there 5-10 minutes, in that short period of time, it can cause kidney failure. It can cause all kinds of organ shutdown. And so he passed away on the day after his 24th birthday. There was another gentleman in Texas who passed away. And then one that really hit the national media in the last year was out in Arizona. Did you guys catch the ring cam video of the UPS driver that was delivering a package on a very hot day? I don't remember the exact temperature, but it was north of 100. And he collapsed on the front porch of the house in Arizona. And he finally made it to his feet, got back to his truck, and the homeowner later saw it on the ring door camera video and called UPS. Now, where I'm going with this is a company as profitable as UPS, as successful as UPS, not to slam Walmart, but I'm going to. We're a multi-billion-dollar company driving Walmart trucks. They strip them down. They make them of aluminum so that they last forever. They just keep replacing the engines. For a lot of years, we drove manual steering trucks because they were too cheap to upgrade them. Finally, we're getting some new vehicles, but out of a cost of $183 per truck, the company refuses to put air conditioning in the trucks. Okay, now that may sound like not a big deal, especially in the northern states, but as we all know, we still go through heat waves up here as well. And one day of danger can cause death, as opposed to, southern states that deal with it more often. Now, here's our argument on that. One, nobody should have to go to work and die, right? Second of all, the company is now attempting to, and mind you, any technology in our trucks is supposed to be negotiated with the union prior to installation. But they have gone out of their way and installed cameras in our vehicles, right? And they've been rolling it out for a while now. And the union are really not opposed to outward-facing cameras, because in a lot of cases, it would actually help our members when they're involved in an accident to prove that they weren't at fault. But they also have been installing inward-facing cameras, spying on the very employees that have made them their record profits. And nobody wants to work in that kind of environment. Nobody, if you had a camera in your face all day long, it's a very uncomfortable thing. And UPS historically would not use it as a learning tool for safety. They would be using it for discipline against these employees that work very hard on a daily basis. Now, here's our issue with that. They're willing to spend the money to put technology in the trucks to spy on us workers, but they won't spend $183 and install air conditioning in those trucks. Thoughts?
Okay. So the only thing that goes through my head is, first, what specifically air conditioning costs $183? I'm on board with your air conditioning. I've spoken to drivers in New Hampshire when I was living there, and I asked them if I could go in the back of his truck. Now, mind you, I lived on top of a mountain, was 10 degrees colder than even most of the areas up there in New England, and his truck was still hot. And I asked about, how he gets his air. My understanding is there's just a vent. Supposedly it's supposed to come in the front, go through the back, but all you're doing is swirling hot air, right? So that you're not gonna help anything. So I agree This one I'm 100% with you guys, except for that cost just sounds. What are you talking about? A fan?
That's when they order a truck, right? The option to have that AC compressor in the truck or not in the truck, the difference in cost is $183.
Okay.
I'm not talking about retrofitting. Retrofitting probably would be more money, right? But I'm talking about when they order a brand new truck and it comes in, the difference in cost between a truck without air conditioning and a truck with air conditioning is $183.
So what's the part that's hurting the people? Is it the AC driving along, or is it just the lack of airflow?
It's just the fact that,
truck?
again, to keep beating the same drum, right? The average employee at UPS doesn't work an 8-hour day, right? We typically work anywhere from 9 to 14 hours. And since the pandemic started, I would argue that most drivers work north of 10 hours a day, closer to the 12-hour average a day. Okay. And 6 days a week. And mind you, your body accumulatively during the week doesn't recover in your 10 hours off when you're home. Right. So come Friday, your body is suffering and you know, you can drink all the water in the world, but you're still going to be dehydrated from the level of sweat that we put out on, you know, hot days, right? And even in the winter, believe it or not, I mean, people don't understand a lot of this sometimes, and not necessarily you guys, but in the wintertime, you dehydrate just as fast because your body's fighting to keep yourself warm. So it goes through just as much water. But our argument is that, you know, people dying in the back of their UPS trucks just shouldn't happen. Right. We're the people that make this company their money, and to put us in that kind of level of danger. And obviously it's not as bad in the north, but still we have heat waves. It only takes one day to, you know, and somebody not being fully hydrated or whatever to cause, you know, even heat stroke, not even heat, you know, not even death, just, you know, there are repercussions for that. And I think that, you know, the company's not claiming poverty and like, oh, we can't afford the AC. They just don't see it as a cost that they want to pay for, but yet they'll pay for a camera system they put in the truck to spy on the employees, which doesn't protect us at all. So to me, a company should be fighting to protect their employees, not spy on their employees.
Yeah, you will not get an argument out of me. AC is a necessity down in the South. I live in Florida. You need it.
Yeah. So we'll move on to the next thing. Okay. And mind you, I talked about wages with the part-timers. I have not talked about it with the full-timers. I mean, yes, we're a union. They're going to ask for a pay raise. That's just the way it works in all contracts. But we're not looking for a giant pay bump. We are paid very well. Our biggest fight when it comes to the full-time side of it is the work-life balance, work-home life balance, right? We shouldn't be forced to work 6 days a week, and we shouldn't be forced to work in an environment that could possibly cost us our lives, right? The wage fight really is more about the part-timers than the full-timers. Just to be clear on that. And yes, to your point, Larry, it's a big cost to the company, but again, they're making an average of $10,000 extra profit per employee than our closest competitor. So it's not like they can't afford to pay the part-timers more. And where that lands, we'll only see. But some of the other things that were our previous administration under the Hoffa Jr. Now, Hoffa Sr., back in the 70s, 80s, whatever, he was a very militant leader. The Teamsters also were mob affiliated, so there was a lot of, you know, that history. But, you know, we were well represented. Now, his son, who just left office last year, was in charge for, I think, 23 years. And during that time, contract after contract after contract, he gave concessions to the company. And a lot of that affected the part-timers and why they didn't keep up with inflation, right? They lost buying power over the years because their wages didn't go up as fast as the cost of living went up. And that's the argument. And why? I mean, if they had been getting little pay raises along the way, we wouldn't be arguing for such a big pay raise for them. But it's the neglect over the last 20 years to these employees that has led to them being in the bottom of the barrel instead of being where they should have been, the same buying power they had back then by now, right? Like they shouldn't lose value in their paycheck when cost of living is going up. But the other thing that's happened to the full-timers, and Hoffa in the last administration, I don't know if he knew he was retiring or what, but overwhelmingly, the members voted down the contract that UPS had proposed to the members. And Hoffa used this obscure rule called the 2/3 rule that was in the bylaws of the Teamsters that said if at least 2/3 of the members didn't bother to vote on the contract, yay or nay, that the administration had the right to overrule the vote and invoke the contract. Now, fun fact, as we discussed, 2/3 of our employment are part-timers, which also means that there's a high turnover rate. A lot of them are college students that come in and work for the summers and then they're gone. Or they're there and they want full-time and they can't get it, so they go somewhere else. So there's a high turnover in a part-time. So a lot of them aren't vested enough to bother to vote in the contract. They just don't care, right? Well, if they don't bother to vote, even if 100% of the drivers vote, we never get to that 2/3 mark, more than 67% participating in the vote. Historically, we've never hit the 67 mark, okay? And no other administration has ever invoked that rule just because of that fact. I mean, you're not going to ever get over that rate while you have that many part-timers that they're not there long enough to care. But he forced it down. And one of the biggest things that hurt us in that contract was it established a position as delivering packages. We call it 22-4s, the drivers. And that basically is just because that's where it lands in the contract, Article 22, Section 4. And it was created a new position, which is exactly the old position, delivering packages, right? Out on the route in a truck delivering packages, but they made it a 2-tier system, right? So the intent, I think, was that, UPS has expanded to 6 days a week delivering. They used to just deliver airs on Saturday. Now we have full service on Saturdays. And because the post office delivers 7 days a week, because they deliver Amazon on Sundays, Amazon is forcing UPS to go 7 days a week. So the Article 22-4 drivers are subject to a Tuesday through Saturday job or a Wednesday through Sunday job, whereas the full-time drivers, normal, what they call regular package car drivers, RPCDs, they are only forced to work Monday through Friday until they started this baloney with the forced 6 day, okay? And not only do these drivers have to work weekends, but their top rate is considerably lower, and depending on where you are in the country, anywhere from $6 to $10 an hour less than the full-time package car drivers for doing the exact same job. And not only do they not, they have to work weekends, but they don't get some of the other privileges that we get. For example, regular package car drivers can sign up for what they call the 9-5 list, which ensures that they won't work more than 9.5 hours, 3 days a week. Right? And if they do, it's a violation. Fun fact, the company doesn't care. They still work and all this overtime. They just pay the grievances. People file grievances, there's a monetary fine for them working on more than 9.5 hours, 3 days a week, and the company doesn't care. They just pay it, which is stupid because people don't file grievances because they want extra pay. They want to go home to see their families, and the company's ignoring it, so they're just paying the penalties. But on top of that, because we work so much overtime at UPS, even before the pandemic, we all work a ton of overtime. That a few contracts ago, we got what they called an 8-hour request, which means twice a month a driver can request an 8-hour day, and the company is supposed to have you off the clock between 8 and 8.5 hours into your day, right? 2 days a week. Right? 2 days a month. Right. So 24 days a year, you can request an 8-hour request, and it can be denied because only so many people a day can get it. And there's different rules, but these 22-4 drivers don't get those protections. They have to work weekends, and they doing the same exact job. So they call it a 2-tier pay system. And that's a big issue for our contract because the members voted down that contract, and Hoffa overrode our rule. Even though it was one of the highest turnouts in voting history for a contract, it didn't meet that threshold, so he overruled us and forced it down us. And the new leadership wants that removed from the thing. Thoughts?
That one's pretty simple. one, you should be upset with your leadership because it's the lack thereof, actually, because they're sitting there getting paid very well. I saw their salary online just shortly before this. So it's very wrong that you manipulate the system that way. Again, the rule is, I mean, it's flawed in itself because, like you said, you can't get those guys, and some of those guys aren't even going to vote anyway, even if they were there, because you don't always get them in the vote, right? So I agree with you 100%. The pay scale, I could see a little less possibly because not as much delivered on a Sunday, but when it all comes down to it, you're all delivering pretty much the same stuff. Keep it across the board. Why make any confusion, right? I mean, so I agree. This one I'm on board with you 100%. I can't see how they manipulated the system.
It causes
as well.
division within the ranks too, because you have drivers doing the same job, and there's a little resentment. Is natural. Just like resentment by a lot of women in industries where men typically make more money for the same jobs. There's a resentment there, and it's not right. And it's basically the same correlation here. You have drivers doing the same exact job making different rates. Josh, you were going to say something?
Yeah, Larry nailed it. There was a lack of leadership there. I mean, it's clear.
Oh, you ain't going to get no argument here. I mean, listen, Hoffa, we got used to it as a union, that he contract after contract over my 23 years with the company, coming up on 24, concession after concession. We lost things every contract. And the problem was that we really didn't have a true alternative to vote for. I mean, he went unchallenged for quite a long period of time. We had a guy named Fred Zuckerman, who is now the secretary treasurer of the International, who ran and nearly defeated Hoffa the previous election. We all went to bed thinking we had new leadership with new vision, and damn those Canadians. Their votes came in overnight, and I'm kidding. I have some good friends in Canada. Diane, I'm kidding. Diane Kilmary, don't fight me. I'm just kidding. But the votes came in from Canada and put Hoffa over the top, and a lot of people were very upset by that. And when the Hoffa administration did what they did to the rank and file in that 2018 contract, his career was over. There was no way he was going to run again. Either he was ready to retire or he chose to retire because he knew he wasn't getting elected. But he handpicked his successor, and the battle became in one of the most heated union official elections in the Teamsters, with Sean O'Brien, who actually worked for Hoffa for many years, and some people blame him for previous contract issues, but he tried to make changes, and he was actually part of the negotiating committee in 2018, and Hoffa fired him because he wasn't doing what Hoffa wanted. And Sean kind of took a step back, and he mended fences with Fred Zuckerman, and they joined up and created the Teamster United slate, and they ran against Hoffa's chosen successor and blew him out of the water. It was a landslide victory, a big statement, and Fred and Sean have now, if you haven't had a chance to look at my TikToks on it, they're very militant. They have told UPS for the entire year that they've been in office that we will strike if these issues aren't resolved. And they're the issues that we've discussed here. And he's told them repeatedly that come July 31st at midnight, or I should say August 1st at 12:01, we will be on strike if this is not settled. They've had a year to prepare. They negotiated the supplements first, starting in January, and over the last 4 months, the company has done nothing but make a mockery of it, throwing around terms like cost-neutral contracts, showing such disrespect as in this happened just this week. One example. In New England, at our supplemental negotiations, the meeting started at 9 in the morning. At 9:10, the company requested to go into caucus, and they left the room. Well, that means they want to talk about something and they're going to come back, right? They left the union sitting there all day long. They came back at 4:50 in the afternoon without any explanation, no response. Where are you guys? When are you coming back? Left the union sitting in a room. And as a result of that disrespect, and it's happening all over the country, national negotiations for the master agreement was supposed to kick off April 17th, and Sean O'Brien has now announced that he will not start national negotiations until these supplements are solved. And that's something he's told them for a year. And they came into the smaller supplements, making a mockery of it. I mean, there's no way you can be making record profits and expect a union not to get some of the goods. I mean, we help make that money. We're the backbone of the company. They would not made it without us. And I don't think any of the things we're asking for is so ridiculous. I mean, I think the biggest ask is bringing the part-timers up to a livable wage. I realize that's a considerable hit to the company, but you know what? They've gotten away with it for 20 years under the Hoffa administration, not keeping the part-timers up with inflation so that their buying power stayed the same. They've lost buying power over the years, and that's ridiculous. So yes, I mean, that's going to cost them some money, but they can afford it. So I guess in closing, because I don't want to, make this an hour episode or anything, but if anything that I'll start with you, Josh, because Larry's been taking the lead on a lot of them. So Josh, of all the things that we've talked about, is there anything that you feel comfortable saying that the union is being ridiculous, or is there anything that can you say that you 100% as a non-union, non-UPS employee would support a strike of UPS employees over these issues?
I think you guys are doing the right thing. I think you're absolutely supporting your members. I think you're doing what you need to do for your workforce. The AC, the comfort of your workers, is 100% on what you should be doing, looking out for your members. I'll relate it to a senior enlisted, member that or what I did in the military. I'm looking out for my guys, and that's what you're doing. Keep fighting the fight and doing what you need to do. What you just touched on with the meeting, absolute disrespect to leave in the morning, leave you hanging, and then come back in the afternoon with a slap in the face. Mm-hmm. So keep fighting the good fight and doing what you need to do.
I appreciate that. Larry, what same question to you. Is there anything that you think we're being ridiculous about if we go on strike over, or after hearing our side of it and the facts that you're aware of, and I didn't bullshit. I didn't make anything. What I'm saying is what the company's saying and what the union's saying. So is there anything you think would be ridiculous to go over on strike over, or do you as a non-UPSer, a non-union member, as a community member, could you get behind this kind of a strike?
Yeah, I'm going to echo Josh. I was a senior enlisted leader, and I'm the same. One, you're fighting the right fight. You do need livable wages, whether that goes where you do need to fight for something more. The AC, that's a no-brainer. You have to survive. I don't care if you're, like you said, north or south. It gets hot, and you have to be able to take care of that. And again, what he said on the negotiations, you got to be fair about it. You can't come in, and that's a lack of leadership again on their behalf, and it just shows that what you said, they don't take it serious.
Would you be surprised if I told you guys that the CEO of UPS, Carol Tomei, told the investors a few months ago that we're not that far apart?
I would believe that.
I mean, she is absolutely misleading the investors. And when we walk out August 1st, which at this point I really don't see how we avoid it based upon UPS's negligence in negotiating to this point, she's going to have a lot of explaining to do to the investors. And mind you, again, numbers, projections, UPS is projected to lose about $1 billion a day that we go on strike.
That means it'll only take 12 days for them to lose their profit.
Yeah. So and we were on strike for, I think, 16 days back in 1997, which was the last time UPS was on strike 25 years ago. I also will tell you, too, that surprisingly, we've come full circle. That strike centered around our part-timers, just like this contract, not making livable wages, also not opportunities to go full-time. Big slogan back then was part-time doesn't work, because, the company had the ability to put people to work full-time, and they were expecting everybody to work part-time because it was less benefits and less overtime and stuff like that. And here we are, full circle, 25 years later, history repeating itself with a lot of the same issues surrounding this strike. And America needs to get ready, because it doesn't sound like a big number, but UPS handles about 6% of the gross GDP, or the term is, we move 6% of this country's stuff. And if you think that's a small thing, trust me, it will grind this economy, and nobody, trust me, there's a single Teamster that wants to go on strike. I'm going to tell you that right now. Nobody does. But the biggest tool we have to get a fair contract is to withhold our labor. And it worked 25 years ago. We got a historical contract. This is a once in a generational thing where we let a lot of things slide for 25 years. And after the pay income that this company has received and the projected incomes moving forward, I have zero issues with asking for the things that we're asking for. And as two people that are non-union, it speaks volumes that you, in the short conversation that we've had, fully support what we're going through. And I appreciate your time and your honesty. And, I didn't want to have two other union members on here to just agree with everything I had to say. So I appreciate your time, your lifelong friends, and I appreciate you helping me out with this show.
Well, I appreciate you teaching me stuff about this union company thing.
I appreciate your time's effort, and when the time comes, we'll appreciate your support too when the public gets behind us, because I think our arguments are valid, and I don't think we're being unreasonable. Gentlemen, I appreciate your time. Have a good night. This was longer than I thought it was going to be, but it's a worthwhile topic, and I think people are really going to delve into this. So I appreciate your time, guys.
Thank you.
So that's the next episode of the Biweekly Grievance.